In the depths of space, where stars whisper secrets and civilizations rise and fall like cosmic tides, there exists a truth that most species refuse to acknowledge: humans don't belong out here. They're too fragile, too emotional, too primitive. Yet somehow, these impossible creatures have carved their names across the galaxy with nothing but stubborn determination and an inexplicable ability to fix what others consider irreparably broken. Commander ZYX had spent 3 decades studying human behavior, convinced she understood their patterns, their limitations, their predictable responses to crisis. She was wrong. Dead wrong. And her misconceptions would shatter the moment she stared into the eyes of the very human who had once saved her life, now sitting in the pilot's seat of an enemy vessel, finger hovering over weapons that could erase her ship from existence. Sometimes the universe has a twisted sense of humor. Sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. And, sometimes, the line between enemy and ally is drawn not in the stars, but in the quiet moments when one being chooses to save another. Consequences be damned. This is the story of such a moment, and the ripple effects that would reshape the balance of power across 3 star systems. The emergency klaxons screamed through the corridors of the Valdorian cruiser Star Whisper as Commander ZYX pressed herself against the bulkhead, her 4-fingered hand gripping her plasma rifle with practiced ease. The ship shuddered under another barrage of enemy fire, and she could hear the distant groaning of stressed metal throughout the vessel. "Commander, we've lost main propulsion," came the voice of her tactical officer through the comm hull breach on Deck 7. "The attacking vessel is demanding our surrender." ZYX's purple-tinted skin darkened with frustration. 3 months into what should have been a routine diplomatic mission to the Kepler station, and they were being hunted by what appeared to be a modified Terran assault craft. The irony wasn't lost on her that humans, the species she'd spent years studying and quietly admiring for their resilience, were now apparently trying to kill her. She made her way through the smoke-filled corridors toward the bridge, stepping over debris and helping wounded crew members as she went. Her elongated limbs moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen too many battles, her large, dark eyes constantly scanning for threats. The Valdorian species had evolved on a low-gravity world, making them naturally tall and graceful, but also surprisingly strong when the situation demanded it. "Status report," she barked as she entered the bridge, her translator automatically converting her melodic native language into standard Galactic. Lieutenant Mordan, her second-in-command, looked up from his console with worry etched across his features. "The attacking vessel matched our course just outside the Nero Nebula. They've been systematically disabling our systems without destroying us completely. It's like they want us alive." "Pirates?" ZYX asked, though she already suspected otherwise. "Pirates would have either destroyed them outright or made demands by now." "Negative. The ship's configuration doesn't match any known pirate vessels." "And, Commander." Mordan paused, his voice taking on an uncertain tone. "They're broadcasting Terran identification codes, but they're not responding to standard Terran Alliance protocols." ZYX felt a chill run through her. Rogue humans were rare, but when they did appear, they were often the most dangerous opponents in the galaxy. Humans had an unsettling ability to adapt and improvise in ways that made them unpredictable in combat. Their emotional nature, which most species viewed as a weakness, somehow transformed into an asset when they were cornered or desperate. The main viewscreen flickered to life, showing the sleek, predatory lines of the attacking vessel. It was definitely of human construction, but modified in ways that spoke of extensive alien technology integration. Weapons that shouldn't exist on a ship that size, shields that pulsed with energy signatures she didn't recognize, and, most disturbing of all, it moved with a grace that suggested artificial intelligence assistance. "They're hailing us," reported the communications officer. On screen. The image that appeared made ZYX's blood freeze in her veins. The pilot was human, as expected, but their face was obscured by an elaborate helmet that seemed to interface directly with the ship's systems. What she could see of their build suggested male, though with humans it was sometimes difficult to tell. They wore a flight suit that bore no insignia she recognized, and their posture radiated confidence and barely contained aggression. "Valdorian vessel, this is Captain Marcus Cole of the independent ship Iron Phoenix. You have violated neutral space and are carrying contraband materials. Prepare to be boarded." The voice was calm, professional, but there was something underneath it that made ZYX's skin crawl. She'd heard that tone before, from humans who'd been pushed too far and had decided that normal rules no longer applied to them. "This is Commander ZYX of the Valdorian diplomatic vessel Star Whisper. We are on a peaceful mission under the protection of the Galactic Accords. You have no authority to detain us." A harsh laugh echoed from the speakers. "The Galactic Accords don't mean much out here, Commander. And I have reason to believe you're carrying something that doesn't belong to you. We are transporting only diplomatic materials and supplies. I demand you allow us to continue our journey." "I'm afraid I can't do that." The human's voice took on a harder edge. "Power down your remaining systems and prepare for boarding. Any resistance will be met with lethal force." ZYX looked around her bridge crew, seeing the same mixture of fear and defiance in their eyes that she felt in her own hearts. Yes, hearts plural. The Valdorian species possessed a dual cardiovascular system that had evolved to handle their homeworld's thin atmosphere, and right now both of hers were beating rapidly. She'd studied human psychology extensively during her time at the Galactic Military Academy. Humans were unique among spacefaring species in their ability to form intense emotional bonds not just with their own kind, but with other species as well. They were also uniquely capable of holding grudges and seeking revenge across spans of time that other species found incomprehensible. If this human was acting against them personally, there had to be a reason. "What contraband do you believe we're carrying?" she asked, buying time while her crew worked frantically to restore power to their defensive systems. "Don't play games with me, Commander. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The quantum resonance crystals from the Helix research station. The ones that were stolen 3 weeks ago." ZYX's mind raced. She knew nothing about any stolen crystals, but the Helix research station was a joint Valdorian-Terran facility that had been developing new faster-than-light communication technology. If someone had stolen experimental materials from there, the implications were staggering. "I assure you, we are not carrying any stolen materials. Our cargo manifests are available for inspection through proper diplomatic channels." "Diplomatic channels," the human repeated, and she could hear the sneer in his voice. "Those same diplomatic channels that covered up what happened to the research team at Helix Station? The same ones that declared the deaths accidental when we both know they were murdered?" Now ZYX was truly confused. The last report she'd received about Helix Station indicated that all operations were proceeding normally. If there had been deaths, why hadn't she been informed? As a senior diplomatic officer, she should have been briefed on any incidents involving joint facilities. "I have no knowledge of any deaths at Helix Station," she said carefully. "If you have information about incidents there, it should be reported through proper channels." "Proper channels," the human laughed bitterly. "You people love your proper channels. Meanwhile, good people die and their killers walk free because someone with enough political influence doesn't want the truth to come out." The ship shuddered again as the human vessel moved closer. ZYX could see weapon ports opening along its hull, and her tactical display showed targeting locks being established on critical systems throughout her ship. "Captain Cole," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I understand you're upset about something that happened at Helix Station, but attacking a diplomatic vessel is not the answer. If there has been a cover-up, there are legal channels available to address it." "Legal channels," the human spat. "Like the ones that declared me dead when I tried to report what really happened? Like the ones that erased my service record and marked me as a deserter?" "I tried your legal channels, Commander. They don't work when the people in charge are the same ones responsible for the crimes." ZYX felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place, though the picture they formed was disturbing. A human military officer who'd discovered something he wasn't supposed to know, who'd tried to report it through official channels, and who'd been silenced and discredited for his efforts. If he was telling the truth, it would explain why he was out here playing pirate with a stolen or modified military vessel. But it still didn't explain why he thought her ship was carrying stolen research materials. "Captain Cole, even if I accepted everything you've told me is true, why do you believe we're carrying these crystals? What evidence do you have?" The human was quiet for a long moment, and ZYX found herself studying what little she could see of him through his helmet's visor. There was something familiar about his posture, the way he held his head, but she couldn't place it. Intelligence reports, he said finally. Your ship departed Valdorian space 3 days after the theft was discovered. Your flight plan includes a stop at Kepler Station, which just happens to be where the crystal's buyer is waiting. And your cargo manifest lists diplomatic materials that require specially shielded containers. Containers that would be perfect for transporting quantum resonance crystals. It was circumstantial evidence at best, but ZYXthera had to admit it was suspicious. Still, she knew they weren't carrying any stolen materials, which meant either the human's intelligence was wrong, or someone was deliberately setting them up. Captain, I give you my word as a Valdorian officer that we are not knowingly carrying any stolen materials. If someone has planted evidence on our ship without our knowledge, we're as much victims as you are. Your word, the human said softly, and there was something in his voice that made her skin prickle. You know, Commander, there was a time when I would have accepted the word of a Valdorian officer without question. There was a time when I thought your people were honorable. The way he said it suggested personal experience, and, suddenly, ZYXthera felt a chill of recognition. The voice, the posture, something about the way he moved his hands when he spoke. She'd seen this human before, but where? Have we met, Captain? She asked, though she was already dreading the answer. The human reached up and slowly removed his helmet, and ZYXthera felt the world shift beneath her feet. The face revealed was older than she remembered, scarred by what looked like recent combat, but unmistakably familiar. Brown hair with premature gray at the temples, green eyes that had once held warmth but now burned with cold fury, and a small scar on his left cheek that she remembered watching him acquire. Hello, ZYX, he said quietly, using the shortened version of her name that only close friends were permitted to use. It's been a while. Marcus Chen. Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen of the Terran Alliance Engineering Corps. The human who had saved her life during the Proxima crisis 5 years ago. The human who had spent 3 days trapped with her in a collapsed mining facility, sharing his rations and keeping her conscious through severe radiation poisoning while they waited for rescue. The human she had recommended for commendation, who had been promoted and reassigned to advanced research duties as a reward for his heroism. The human who, according to his own words, was now officially dead. Marcus, she whispered, and saw something flicker in his eyes at the use of his given name. What happened to you? What happened? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. I trusted the system, ZYX. I trusted that if I did the right thing and reported what I saw, justice would be served. I was naive. The Helix Station incident? Among others. His expression hardened again. Did you know, Commander, that your government has been secretly funding illegal weapons research? Did you know that the crystals I'm looking for aren't just for faster-than-light communication, but for creating quantum bombs that could destroy entire star systems? ZYXthera felt her world tilting on its axis. That's impossible. The Valdorian Council would never authorize such research. It's against our fundamental beliefs. The Valdorian Council doesn't know, Marcus said. A shadow organization has been operating within your government, using diplomatic immunity and black budgets to fund research that would horrify your people if they knew about it. And, when I discovered their operation at Helix Station, when I tried to report it, I found out how deep the corruption goes. You're talking about a conspiracy that would involve hundreds of people across multiple governments, ZYXthera protested. Something like that couldn't stay hidden. It has for the past 7 years, Marcus replied grimly. Ever since the Andromedae War ended and certain people decided that the only way to prevent future conflicts was to ensure that nobody could challenge human and Valdorian supremacy in this sector. Even if it meant developing weapons of mass destruction in secret. ZYXthera's mind reeled. The Andromedae War had been the bloodiest conflict in galactic history, claiming billions of lives across dozens of worlds. If someone was using fear of another such war to justify developing planet-killing weapons, it would explain why they'd go to such lengths to silence anyone who discovered the truth. But it also raised a terrifying question. Marcus, she said slowly, if you're right about all this, if there really is a shadow organization developing quantum weapons, then why are you trying to stop one shipment of crystals? Why not expose the whole conspiracy? His smile was cold and bitter. Because, my dear Commander, exposing the conspiracy would require evidence. And the only evidence I have is going to be in the hands of the buyers at Kepler Station. Once I have those crystals, I can trace their quantum signatures back to the source and prove that the weapons program exists. And if we don't have the crystals you're looking for? Then, I was wrong, and I'll apologize and let you go. But, if you do have them. His hand moved to his weapon controls. Then, I'm going to have to ask you to choose sides, ZYX. The people you serve, or the truth. ZYX Thera stared at the man who had once saved her life, who was now threatening to take it, and realized that everything she thought she knew about the galaxy was about to change. The worst part was that, deep down, she was starting to believe he might be right. The tension on the bridge was thick enough to cut with a plasma torch. ZYX Thera found herself caught between loyalty to her government and the growing certainty that Marcus was telling the truth. She'd known him for only 3 days during the Proxima crisis, but those had been 3 days of life and death situations that stripped away all pretense and revealed a person's true character. The Marcus she'd known was honest to a fault, brave, and utterly committed to doing what was right regardless of personal cost. This Marcus looked older, harder, marked by experiences she could barely imagine. But, underneath the scars and the cynicism, she could still see the same moral core that had driven him to share his last nutrition bars with an injured alien who had been nothing more than a stranger to him. I need to verify your claims, she said finally. Will you give me access to your evidence? Marcus studied her for a long moment. Some of it. But first, I need to know what's really in your cargo hold. And, I need to know if you're willing to help me, or if I'm going to have to take what I need by force. ZYX Thera made a decision that went against everything her diplomatic training had taught her. Lieutenant Mordan, escort Captain Cole to Cargo Bay 7. Full access, no restrictions. Her second-in-command's skin pale to almost white. Commander, that's a violation of at least 6 different protocols. The protocols assume we're dealing with a standard hostile boarding, ZYX Thera replied. This situation is anything but standard. Marcus stood slowly, his movements careful and non-threatening despite the weapons he carried. I appreciate the trust, ZYX. But, I'll need more than just your word. Send 2 of your people with me, armed if it makes you feel better. And, I want you monitoring everything through your internal sensors. It was a reasonable request from someone who supposedly wanted to steal from them. Too reasonable. Pirates or conventional enemies would have simply forced their way aboard and taken what they wanted. The fact that Marcus was offering to be monitored suggested he was more interested in the truth than in theft. 20 minutes later, ZYX Thera watched through the cargo bay's internal monitors as Marcus examined the sealed containers that held their diplomatic supplies. His hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent years working with technical equipment, but it was his expression that told the real story. As he scanned container after container, his face showed growing confusion rather than satisfaction. Commander, he said, speaking directly to one of the monitoring cameras, are these all the sealed containers on your ship? Yes, she replied through the comm system. Everything we're carrying is in that bay. Marcus stepped back from the containers, his shoulders sagging slightly. None of these show quantum resonance signatures. Whatever you're carrying, it's not what I'm looking for. ZYX Thera felt a complex mix of relief and concern. Relief that her ship wasn't unknowingly transporting stolen materials, but concern about what Marcus's presence here really meant. If he wasn't after contraband on her ship, why had he attacked them? Marcus, how certain were you that we were carrying the crystals? Certain enough to risk everything, he admitted. My intelligence source was very specific. Your ship, your cargo, your destination. Either the information was wrong, or someone wanted you to intercept us, ZYX Thera finished the thought. Someone who knew you were investigating the weapons program and wanted to discredit you further. That's starting to look like a possibility. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she remembered from their time trapped together. If someone fed me false intelligence to get me to attack a diplomatic vessel, it would certainly make me look like the terrorist they've already painted me as. The implications were staggering. If Marcus was being manipulated, it meant the conspiracy he'd discovered was not only real but sophisticated enough to predict and counter his movements. It also meant ZYX Thera and her crew were pawns in a much larger game. "I need to see your evidence," she said. "All of it." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. "If I show you everything, there's no going back. You'll become a target just like I am. Are you prepared for that? If what you're telling me is true, then my government is involved in developing weapons that could destroy civilizations. I can't ignore that." "All right. But not here, not on an open channel. We need to talk in person, somewhere private." An hour later, ZYX found herself aboard Marcus's ship, the Iron Phoenix, and she was beginning to understand why he'd been able to outmaneuver her much larger vessel. The ship was a masterwork of human engineering and alien technology integration. Every surface seemed to serve multiple purposes, every system had backup systems, and the whole thing felt like a weapon that could think for itself. "You built this?" she asked, running her hand along what appeared to be a Zaltharian shield generator interface mounted next to human-designed navigation controls. "Built, stolen, salvaged, and modified," Marcus replied. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're officially dead and have nothing left to lose." He led her to what must have been the ship's briefing room, though it looked more like a war room. The walls were covered with star charts, photographs, documents, and connecting lines that formed a web of relationships spanning dozens of star systems. At the center of it all was a photograph of Helix Station, with red marks indicating what looked like areas of destruction. "This is what I found when I arrived at Helix Station 6 months ago," Marcus began, calling up a holographic display that made ZYX stomachs turn. The station was a twisted wreck, its research modules blown apart from within, and the debris field showed signs of deliberate destruction rather than accident. 17 researchers dead, Marcus continued, his voice flat and emotionless. All of them working on Project Quantum Echo, a joint research initiative that was supposed to be developing faster than light communication arrays. Except when I accessed the station's data cores, I found out what they were really working on. The hologram shifted to show technical specifications that made ZYX's blood run cold. Quantum resonance crystals arranged in precise geometric patterns, equations that described the amplification of quantum fluctuations, and energy output calculations that could only mean one thing. "Quantum bombs," she whispered. "Each one capable of destabilizing matter at the subatomic level across an area roughly the size of a small planet," Marcus confirmed. And, according to the research notes, they were very close to a breakthrough when something went wrong. ZYX studied the technical data, her trained engineer's mind automatically analyzing the principles involved. "This level of destruction, it's not just a weapon. It's a tool for committing genocide on an industrial scale." Which is why the research team tried to shut down the project when they realized what they were really building. And why someone killed them to keep them quiet. "Someone from your government or mine?" Marcus brought up another set of documents, these bearing the seals of both the Terran Alliance and the Valdorian Council. Both. The project was being funded through black budgets on both sides, with oversight from a joint committee that doesn't officially exist. The names on the oversight committee made ZYX's skin crawl. Some of the most powerful figures in both governments, people she'd admired and respected, apparently deeply involved in illegal weapons development. If this information was accurate, it represented a betrayal of everything the Galactic Accords stood for. "How did you get access to this information?" she asked. One of the researchers managed to hide a data cache before they were killed. My engineering team was called in to examine the station's wreckage and determine what had caused the explosion. I found the cache hidden in a maintenance conduit and realized what it contained. Marcus's expression darkened. That's when I tried to report it through official channels. Big mistake. What happened? Within 24 hours of filing my report, I was arrested on charges of theft, treason, and sabotage. My service record was sealed, my security clearance was revoked, and I was scheduled for immediate court-martial. The charges were obviously fabricated, but they would have stuck because the people prosecuting me were the same ones involved in the conspiracy. ZYX felt pieces clicking into place. "So you escaped?" "With help from people who believed my story." Other military personnel who'd started asking uncomfortable questions about black projects and unexplained budget allocations. We realized that if we were going to stop this, we'd need evidence that couldn't be dismissed or buried. The quantum resonance crystals. Marcus nodded. According to the hidden data, a shipment of completed crystals was supposed to be delivered to a buyer at Kepler Station. If I could intercept that shipment and trace its quantum signature back to its source, I'd have proof that the weapons program is real and active. But my ship wasn't carrying the crystals, ZYX pointed out. No, which means either my intelligence was wrong, or someone wanted me to believe you were carrying them. Marcus pulled up another display, this one showing communication intercepts and surveillance data. I'm starting to think it was the latter. The evidence he showed her was damning. Communication intercepts showing someone feeding him false information about her ship's cargo, surveillance footage of known agents watching his movements, and, most disturbing of all, evidence that the real crystal shipment had probably already been delivered to Kepler Station days ago. They played me, Marcus said bitterly. They fed me false intelligence, waited for me to act on it, and now they can point to my attack on your diplomatic vessel as proof that I'm the terrorist they've claimed all along. ZYX studied the timeline of events, her analytical mind working through the implications. It's worse than that, Marcus. By making you attack my ship, they've created a diplomatic incident that will justify increased security measures and military spending. The perfect cover for expanding their weapons program. The human slammed his fist on the table, and ZYX was reminded of why humans were considered so dangerous when pushed to their limits. The emotional intensity they could channel into action was something most other species found both fascinating and terrifying. So what do we do now? He asked. My credibility is shot, your government probably thinks you've been taken hostage by a terrorist, and, somewhere out there, they're building weapons that could destroy entire star systems. ZYX found herself thinking about the oath she'd taken when she joined the Valdorian Diplomatic Corps. To serve the cause of peace and justice throughout the galaxy, to protect the innocent, and to oppose tyranny in all its forms. If Marcus was right, then, the greatest threat to galactic peace wasn't coming from outside their governments, but from within them. We stop them, she said finally. We find the real crystal shipment, we gather proof of the conspiracy, and we expose it to the galaxy. That's going to be extremely dangerous, Marcus warned. These people have already committed murder to protect their secret. They won't hesitate to kill us both. Then, we'll just have to be better than they are. ZYX stood up, her decision made. You saved my life once, Marcus. Now let me help save yours. She saw something shift in his expression, a softening of the hard edges that pain and betrayal had carved into his features. For just a moment, he looked like the young engineer she'd met 5 years ago, the one who'd risked his own life to keep her alive in the collapsed tunnels of Proxima Station. You know this means we're going up against some of the most powerful people in both our governments, he said. If we're caught, we'll be branded as traitors and terrorists. If we don't act, those same people will have weapons capable of committing genocide on a galactic scale, she replied. Sometimes doing the right thing means accepting the consequences. Marcus smiled for the first time since she'd seen him again, and, for a moment she could see the man he'd been before the conspiracy had destroyed his life. All right, Commander. Where do we start? ZYX moved to the star chart on the wall and pointed to Kepler Station. We start by finding out who received those crystals. And, then, we follow the trail wherever it leads, no matter how high up it goes. As they began planning their investigation, neither of them noticed the small surveillance probe that detached itself from the hull of ZYX ship and began transmitting their conversation to a destination deep in the Valdorian home system. The conspiracy they were trying to expose had been watching them from the beginning, and now it was time to take more direct action. In a secured facility buried beneath the surface of Valdorian Prime, a figure sat in shadow reviewing the transmitted data. Plans were already in motion to deal with this new threat, plans that would either silence the two troublesome officers permanently or turn them into unwitting weapons against their own cause. The game was far from over, and the stakes kept getting higher. Kepler Station hung in the void like a metallic spider, its arms reaching out into space to catch the streams of commerce that flowed between the core worlds and the frontier systems. It was a neutral port, officially governed by an international council, but everyone knew that real power here belonged to whoever had the most credits and the fewest scruples. ZYX adjusted her disguise one final time before stepping off the shuttle. The synthetic skin patches would fool casual observers into thinking she was a different subspecies of Valdorian, while the forged identification documents Marcus had provided would pass all but the most thorough security checks. Beside her, Marcus looked completely different thanks to facial prosthetics and hair dye that had changed him from a brown-haired human to a blonde one with different facial structure. "Remember," Marcus said quietly as they moved through the docking bay, "we're independent traders looking for exotic technology to sell in the Outer Rim. Nothing more suspicious than people trying too hard to be inconspicuous." The plan was simple enough in theory. Find whoever had received the quantum resonance crystals, trace the shipment back to its source, and gather enough evidence to expose the conspiracy. In practice, they were walking into a space station full of potential enemies with nothing but fake identities and a desperate hope that they could stay alive long enough to accomplish their mission. Kepler Station's commercial district was a maze of shops, bars, and trading posts that catered to every species and every vice imaginable. The air was thick with the smells of a dozen different atmospheres being recycled through life support systems, and the constant background noise of conversation in 30 languages created a perfect cover for private discussions. There, Marcus pointed to a bar called the Quantum Leap, its neon sign flickering in patterns that hurt ZYX's eyes. "According to the shipping records I intercepted, our target made contact with someone at that establishment. They settled into a corner booth where they could watch the room while appearing to enjoy drinks that tasted like industrial solvent. The clientele was exactly what ZYXthera had expected for a place like this: smugglers, mercenaries, information brokers, and various species of criminals who operated in the gray areas between star systems." "How do we identify our target?" ZYXthera asked, speaking in a dialect of Valdorian that Marcus had learned during their imprisonment together. "We don't. We let them identify themselves." Marcus activated a small device that looked like a standard personal communicator but was actually broadcasting a very specific quantum frequency. Anyone carrying quantum resonance crystals will have sensors that detect this frequency. They'll either come to investigate, or they'll try to leave quickly. It was a clever plan, but it relied on their target being curious rather than paranoid. Given the stakes involved, ZYXthera suspected paranoia was more likely. She was proven right when 3 figures at different tables all stood up simultaneously and began moving toward the exits. "Split up," Marcus said. "You take the Andromedan, I'll follow the human. Stay in touch." ZYXthera shadowed the tall, blue-skinned figure through the station's corridors, keeping just close enough to maintain visual contact while staying far enough back to avoid detection. Andromedans were notoriously paranoid as a species, which made them excellent at intelligence work but also made them difficult to follow without being noticed. Her target led her through a series of maintenance corridors and service areas that suggested intimate knowledge of the station's layout. This wasn't a casual visitor or even a regular trader, but someone who had spent significant time learning Kepler Station's hidden routes and back passages. The chase ended at a private hangar bay where a sleek courier ship sat powered up and ready for immediate departure. As her target approached the ship, ZYXthera realized she needed to act quickly or lose her only lead. "Excuse me," she called out in standard Galactic, pitching her voice to sound like a lost tourist. "I'm looking for Bay 17. Could you help me?" The Andromedan turned, and ZYXthera found herself looking into the coldest pair of eyes she'd ever seen. These weren't the eyes of a simple trader or smuggler, but of someone who'd killed before and would do so again without hesitation. "You're in the wrong section," the Andromedan said, their hand moving casually toward what was probably a concealed weapon. "Passenger bays are on level 5. "Oh, thank you." ZYXthera began to turn away, then stopped as if remembering something. "You wouldn't happen to know anything about quantum resonance technology, would you? I heard there might be someone here interested in buying unusual crystals." The reaction was immediate and violent. The Andromedan's hand snapped to their weapon, but ZYXthera had been expecting that. Her own hand shot out in a move she'd learned from Marcus during their imprisonment, striking a nerve cluster that temporarily paralyzed the Andromedan's arm. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, stepping back with her hands raised. "I just want information." "Who sent you?" the Andromedan demanded, cradling their paralyzed arm. "No one sent me. I'm investigating the murder of 17 researchers at Helix Station, and I think you might have information that could help." Something flickered in the Andromedan's eyes, and, for a moment, their rigid posture softened slightly. "You're talking about things that could get us both killed. A lot of people are already dead. Including the original research team that discovered what those crystals were really for." The Andromedan studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that surprised her. "Get aboard the ship. Quickly. If we're going to talk about this, it won't be where station security can monitor us." Against every instinct screaming at her to run, ZYX followed the Andromedan aboard their courier ship. The interior was Spartanly functional, designed for speed and stealth rather than comfort. But what caught her attention were the monitoring devices that lined the bulkheads, sophisticated enough to defeat most surveillance attempts. "My name is Kethvar," the Andromedan said, settling into the pilot's chair while keeping one eye on ZYX. "I used to be a researcher for the Andromedan's Strategic Intelligence Division before I discovered my government was involved in some very illegal activities." "Activities involving quantum resonance crystals?" "Among other things. The conspiracy you're investigating isn't limited to human and Veldorian governments. It reaches into the highest levels of at least 6 different species administrations, all working together to develop weapons that could reshape the balance of power in the galaxy." ZYX felt a chill run through her. If the conspiracy was that widespread, it would explain how they'd managed to keep it secret for so long. It would also make exposing it infinitely more dangerous. "How do you know about my investigation?" she asked. "Because I've been investigating the same conspiracy for the past 2 years. When someone started broadcasting quantum detection frequencies in this station, I knew it was either another investigator or a trap. I was hoping for the former." "Someone else is investigating? A human named Marcus Chen?" Kethvar's expression shifted to what might have been surprise on an Andromedan face. "Marcus Chen is supposed to be dead. The reports said he was killed in a terrorist bombing 3 months ago. The reports were wrong. He's very much alive, and he's working with me to expose this conspiracy. Then, we may have a chance after all." Kethvar activated the ship's communication system. "I've been tracking the crystal shipments for months, but I needed more evidence to prove the connections between the different government agencies involved. If your Marcus Chen has technical data from Helix Station, combined with what I've gathered, we might be able to expose the whole thing," ZYX finished. Their conversation was interrupted by an incoming communication from Marcus. His voice was tense with urgency. "ZYX, we have a problem. The human I followed led me to a weapons dealer who's been selling modified quantum crystals to private military contractors. But that's not the worst part." "What is it?" "The buyer isn't some rogue scientist or terrorist group. It's a joint task force operating under the direct authority of the Galactic Security Council. They're not just developing these weapons in secret, they're preparing to deploy them." ZYX felt the deck seem to shift beneath her feet. The Galactic Security Council was the highest authority in known space, responsible for maintaining peace between species and preventing exactly the kind of weapons proliferation they were apparently sponsoring. "That's impossible," she said. "The Security Council would never authorize weapons of mass destruction." "The Security Council as a whole might not know," Kethvar interjected. "But certain members could be using their positions to authorize black operations without oversight." Marcus's voice came through the calm with barely contained anger. "It gets worse. According to the dealer, the next shipment is scheduled for delivery to a staging area near the Rigel system. They're planning to field test the weapons on an uninhabited planet. Field testing means they're close to making them operational," ZYX realized. "How long do we have?" 48 hours, maybe less. And there's something else. The dealer recognized my description from wanted posters. "Someone's put a bounty on both our heads. A very large bounty." As if summoned by his words, the hangar bay's external sensors detected multiple ships approaching the station at high speed. Kethvar's hands flew over the controls, bringing up tactical displays that showed armed vessels moving into attack positions around Kepler Station. "Bounty hunters," Kethvar observed grimly. "And not the kind who take prisoners. Can you get us out of here?" ZYX asked. "Maybe. But if we run now, we lose our only chance to stop the weapons test. Once they prove the crystals work, they'll start mass production. The ship shuddered as the first energy blast struck the station's outer hull. Through the viewports, ZYXthera could see escape pods launching from other sections of the station as civilians fled the impending battle. "We need those shipping records," Marcus said over the comm. "Without them, we can't prove where the crystals came from or where they're going." "The records are in the station's main database," Kefvar said. "But accessing them means getting to the central core through a station that's about to become a war zone." ZYXthera made the kind of decision that Marcus had taught her to make during their imprisonment. When faced with impossible odds, choose the action that serves the greater good, regardless of personal cost. "Do it," she said. "Get us to the central core. We'll worry about escaping afterward." Kefvar's ship lifted off with a grace that belied its size, slipping out of the hangar bay just as explosive decompression claimed the adjacent docking arm. The station was coming apart around them as bounty hunters exchanged fire with station security, but all ZYXthera could think about was the countdown ticking away in her mind. 48 hours to prevent weapons testing that could lead to galactic genocide. 48 hours to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of multiple governments. And, somewhere in the chaos around them, Marcus was fighting his way toward the same goal from a different direction. As their ship dove into the mechanical maze of Kepler Station's interior structure, ZYXthera found herself thinking about the oath she'd taken as a diplomatic officer. She'd sworn to serve the cause of peace, but she was beginning to understand that sometimes peace could only be preserved through actions that looked very much like war. The irony wasn't lost on her that in trying to prevent the development of ultimate weapons, she was learning to think and act like the soldiers who would eventually have to use those weapons if diplomacy failed. But Marcus had taught her something else during their imprisonment. Sometimes the only way to stop a greater evil was to embrace a lesser one. And if that meant becoming a criminal and a terrorist in the eyes of the law to prevent genocide on a galactic scale, then so be it. The ship shook as they took fire from a bounty hunter vessel, and ZYXthera gripped her restraints as Kefvar threw them into evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible in a larger craft. Through the chaos and the fear, she held on to one thought: somewhere in this station was the evidence they needed to save countless lives. All they had to do was survive long enough to find it. The central core of Kepler Station was a cathedral of technology, its walls lined with processing units that handled the data streams of thousands of ships and millions of transactions. Under normal circumstances, it would have been heavily guarded and completely inaccessible to unauthorized personnel. But these weren't normal circumstances. The bounty hunter attack had drawn most of the station security away from internal areas, leaving only automated systems protecting the most sensitive areas. Systems that Kefvar's Andromedan intelligence training had taught him to circumvent. 2 minutes, he said, his elongated fingers dancing across interface panels with impossible speed. That's how long we have before the security protocols realize someone is accessing restricted files. ZYXthera watched the corridor behind them, her appropriated security weapon ready to deal with any unwelcome visitors. The station shook periodically as the battle raged outside, and she could hear the distant sound of hull breaches and decompression alerts. "Got it," Kefvar announced. "Shipping manifest for the quantum crystals, including point of origin and final destination. But you're not going to like what I'm seeing." The data that appeared on his portable display made ZYXthera's skin pale to almost white. The crystals hadn't been shipped from a research facility or weapons lab, but from a diplomatic storage facility on Valdorian Prime. The same facility where her own ship had been loaded with supplies before their current mission. "We were carrying them," she whispered. "My ship was transporting the crystals, but they weren't in the containers Marcus searched." "Hidden compartments," Kefvar confirmed, reading through the technical specifications. "Built into the hull structure itself, shielded to prevent detection by normal sensors." "But why?" ZYXthera's mind raced through the implications. If they wanted to transport illegal weapons components, why use a diplomatic vessel? Why risk exposure? Because diplomatic vessels aren't subject to customs inspections or security sweeps, a familiar voice said behind them. They're the perfect way to transport contraband. They spun to see Marcus approaching through the smoke-filled corridor, his clothes torn and his face streaked with what looked like blood. But he was alive and moving under his own power, which was more than she dared hope for given the chaos outside. How did you find us? She asked. I followed the trail of unconscious security guards and disabled surveillance systems. HFY leaves quite a signature when he's in a hurry. Marcus nodded to the Andromedan with what might have been respect. Though I have to admit, I'm impressed. It would have taken me twice as long to get through those security barriers. We don't have time for compliments, HFY said curtly. The station's defense grid is failing, and, once the bounty hunters break through, this place becomes a shooting gallery. Marcus moved to another terminal and began downloading additional files. I found something in the weapons dealer's records that changes everything. The quantum weapons aren't being developed to use against external enemies. They're being designed to use against civilian populations. What? ZYXthera felt her world shift again. That's genocide, not warfare. Controlled genocide, Marcus corrected grimly. According to the strategic planning documents I found, the weapons are intended to selectively eliminate populations that pose a threat to galactic stability. In other words, any species or colony that doesn't fall in line with the policies of the conspiracy. HFY stopped what he was doing and stared at Marcus. You're talking about a plan to reshape galactic civilization by eliminating everyone who disagrees with the conspirators. That's exactly what I'm talking about. And, the first test target isn't an uninhabited planet. It's a refugee colony in the Rigel system that's been harboring political dissidents from 3 different species. The magnitude of what they were uncovering hit ZYXthera like a physical blow. This wasn't just about illegal weapons development or even conventional warfare. It was about a small group of individuals from multiple species deciding to play God with the lives of billions of beings across the galaxy. How many people are in this colony? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. 2 million, Marcus said quietly. Including approximately 400,000 children. The station shuddered more violently, and emergency lighting began flashing as power systems failed throughout the structure. Through the viewports, they could see pieces of the station's outer ring breaking away and tumbling into space. We need to go, HFY said urgently. Now. Not without all the data, Marcus insisted. This might be our only chance to get proof of the conspiracy's full scope. The data won't matter if we're dead, ZYXthera pointed out. But, even as she said it, she was helping Marcus transfer files to portable storage devices. The information they'd gathered was too important to lose, even if obtaining it cost them their lives. The sound of approaching footsteps made them all freeze. Multiple sets of boots moving in formation down the corridor toward their position. Professional soldiers, not panicked civilians or opportunistic looters. Bounty hunters, Marcus whispered, drawing his weapon. No, HFY corrected, studying a security display. Military. 3 different species, professional equipment, moving like a special operations team. Government forces? ZYXthera asked. Or the conspiracy's private army, Marcus suggested. Either way, they're not here to rescue us. The footsteps stopped just outside the core chamber, and a voice called out in Standard Galactic. This is Colonel Vexthera of the Valdorian Special Operations Command. You are surrounded. Surrender immediately and you will not be harmed. ZYXthera felt her blood turn to ice. Vexthera was her superior officer, the person who'd assigned her to the diplomatic mission in the first place. If he was here, it meant the conspiracy reached directly into the highest levels of Valdorian military command. Colonel, she called back, deciding that a direct approach might be their only chance. This is Commander ZYXthera. I need to report evidence of a conspiracy involving illegal weapons development. There was a long pause before the colonel responded. Commander, you've been listed as killed in action by terrorist forces. Your presence here is unexpected. I'm very much alive, sir. And I have evidence that certain elements within our government are involved in developing weapons of mass destruction in violation of galactic law. Evidence that you obtained through acts of piracy, terrorism, and theft, another voice added. This one belonged to a human, speaking with the kind of educated accent that suggested high rank. Evidence that would be inadmissible in any court of law. Marcus leaned close to ZYXthera and whispered, That's General Harrison, Terran Alliance Intelligence. If he's here, it means both our governments are actively covering this up. The realization that they were facing not rogue elements but official representatives of their own governments was almost more than ZYX could process. Everything she'd believed about justice, law, and the fundamental decency of civilized species was crumbling around her. General Harrison, Marcus called out. This is Staff Sergeant Marcus Chen, reporting evidence of war crimes committed by joint Terran-Valdorian forces. Staff Sergeant Chen was killed in a terrorist bombing 3 months ago, the general replied smoothly. Whoever you are, impersonating a dead soldier is a serious crime. Then, how do I know about the hidden data cache at Helix Station? How do I know about Project Quantum Echo? How do I know that you personally authorized the elimination of the research team when they threatened to expose the weapons program? The silence that followed was more telling than any words could have been. When General Harrison spoke again, his voice had lost its diplomatic politeness and taken on the hard edge of someone who decided that negotiation was no longer an option. You have 60 seconds to surrender the stolen data and come out with your hands visible. After that, we come in shooting. Kethvar was already working frantically at another terminal, downloading what looked like the station's emergency protocols. There's a service shaft that leads to an emergency escape pod bay. But we'll have to move fast and hope they don't have the bay covered. They'll have it covered, Marcus said with certainty. These people don't leave things to chance. Then, what do you suggest? ZYX asked. Marcus looked at the data they'd gathered, then, at the two people who'd risked everything to help him expose the conspiracy. His expression took on the same grim determination she'd seen in the collapsed tunnels of Proxima Station, when he'd known the chances of survival were minimal but had refused to give up anyway. We make sure the data gets out, he said. Even if we don't. What are you thinking? Kethvar asked suspiciously. The station's communication array. If we can reach it, we can broadcast everything we've learned on an open channel that every ship in the system will receive. The conspiracy can silence 3 people, but they can't silence thousands of witnesses. The communication array is on the other side of the station, ZYX pointed out. We'd never make it past their forces. Not all of us, Marcus agreed. But one of us might. If the other 2 create enough of a distraction. The sound of cutting tools began echoing through the core chamber as the special operations team started working their way through the sealed blast doors. They had perhaps 2 minutes before the soldiers broke through and ended the conversation permanently. There's another option, Kethvar said suddenly. The station's quantum communication system. It's designed for instantaneous data transmission across galactic distances. If we can access it, we can send our evidence directly to news organizations and government oversight committees simultaneously. Can you access it from here? Marcus asked. Maybe. But it would require overriding about 17 different security protocols and probably trigger every alarm system on the station. Do it, ZYX said without hesitation. If there's a chance to stop the weapons test and save those 2 million people, we have to take it. As Kethvar's hands flew over the controls, ZYX found herself thinking about the oath she'd taken as a diplomat. To serve peace and justice throughout the galaxy. She'd thought that meant negotiating treaties and resolving conflicts through words rather than weapons. Now she understood that sometimes peace could only be preserved by people willing to sacrifice everything to expose the truth. Got it, Kethvar announced. Quantum communication system is online. Broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. The blast doors exploded inward just as the transmission began, filling the core chamber with smoke and the harsh light of military plasma cutters. Through the chaos, ZYX could see armored figures moving with the precision of elite soldiers, weapons raised and ready. This is Commander ZYX of the Valdorian Diplomatic Corps, she said into Kethvar's communicator, her voice carrying across space to anyone willing to listen. What you are about to hear is evidence of a conspiracy to develop and deploy weapons of mass destruction against civilian populations. The first shots echoed through the chamber as Marcus and Kethvar took cover behind the massive data processing units. But the transmission was already spreading, carrying their evidence to news organizations, government oversight committees, and military commanders who weren't part of the conspiracy. Within minutes, the information would be public knowledge throughout the galaxy. The weapons test would be impossible to conduct in secret, and the conspiracy would be exposed to the light of public scrutiny. But, as plasma bolts began carving chunks out of the equipment around her, ZYX-Thera realized that victory and survival were two very different things. The conspiracy might be exposed, but that didn't mean any of them would live to see justice served. Sometimes, she reflected as she returned fire at the soldiers who'd once been her own people, the price of doing the right thing was higher than anyone should have to pay. But that didn't make it any less necessary to pay it. The firefight in Kepler Station's central core lasted exactly 7 minutes and 32 seconds. ZYX-Thera would remember that timing for the rest of her life, because those were the longest 7 minutes she'd ever experienced, and because they represented the moment when everything she thought she knew about honor, duty, and justice was permanently altered. Marcus had been right about the conspiracy's reach. The special operations team that cornered them included not just Valdorian and human soldiers, but also Andromedan commandos and Rigelian specialists, proof that the weapons program had tentacles reaching into at least 4 different species' military hierarchies. But what Marcus hadn't anticipated was that not all of those soldiers were willing participants in genocide. The turning point came when one of the Andromedan commandos, hearing the evidence being broadcast over the quantum communication system, made a choice that would echo across the galaxy. Commander Thalvash had been told they were pursuing terrorists who'd stolen classified military technology. Learning that the technology was designed to exterminate civilian populations, including refugee colonies harboring his own displaced people, changed his perspective dramatically. "Stand down," he ordered his squad, turning his weapon toward the human special forces instead of the supposed terrorists. "These people are telling the truth." The resulting confusion bought ZYX-Thera, Marcus, and Kethvar the precious seconds they needed to complete their data transmission and reach the emergency escape pods. But it came at a cost measured in lives, as soldiers who'd trained together and fought together suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a moral divide that couldn't be bridged with words. 3 weeks later, ZYX-Thera stood in the witness chamber of the Galactic Justice Tribunal, looking out at an assembly that included representatives from every spacefaring species in known space. The evidence they'd broadcast from Kepler Station had triggered the largest political crisis in galactic history, with governments falling and entire military hierarchies being restructured as the scope of the conspiracy became clear. "Commander ZYX-Thera," the Chief Justice said, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 worlds, "you stand accused of theft, terrorism, assault on military personnel, and violation of your oath as a diplomatic officer. How do you respond to these charges?" "I plead guilty to all charges, Your Honor," she said without hesitation. "And I would do it again." A murmur ran through the assembly. It wasn't the response anyone had expected from someone facing life imprisonment or execution for crimes against the state. "You would do it again?" the Chief Justice asked. "Even knowing the consequences?" "Your Honor, the evidence we gathered prevented the extermination of 2 million innocent beings and exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of 6 different governments. If that makes me a criminal, then I accept that designation." Marcus, who was scheduled to testify next, watched from the defendant's section with something that might have been pride on his scarred features. Beside him, Kethvar maintained the stoic expression that had served him well during 2 years of investigating the conspiracy alone. The proceedings had been going on for days, with testimony from dozens of witnesses and examination of thousands of pieces of evidence. The scope of what had been uncovered was staggering: a shadow organization operating within multiple governments, developing weapons capable of destroying entire planets, and planning to use those weapons to reshape galactic civilization according to their vision of order. "Commander," the prosecution continued, "do you deny that your actions resulted in the deaths of 17 military personnel during the incident at Kepler Station?" "I don't deny it," ZYX-Thera replied. "But I would point out that those deaths occurred because soldiers loyal to their governments chose to fight soldiers loyal to their consciences. The responsibility for those deaths lies not with those who exposed the truth, but with those who created a situation where good people had to choose between following orders and preventing genocide." The human prosecutor, General Harrison's replacement after the former intelligence chief had been arrested, pressed forward. "And do you deny that your broadcast of classified information compromised ongoing military operations and endangered agents operating in deep cover?" "I don't deny that either," ZYX-Thera said. But I would ask the court to consider whether any military operation or intelligence network that relies on the development of weapons of mass destruction for use against civilians deserves protection under the law. It was a dangerous strategy, she knew. By refusing to show remorse or claim that her actions had been justified by emergency circumstances, she was essentially daring the tribunal to make her a martyr for the cause of truth. But Marcus had taught her something during their first imprisonment together. Sometimes the most powerful weapon against tyranny was the willingness to accept the consequences of doing what was right. The prosecution calls General Harrison to testify, the prosecutor announced. ZYX watched as her former commanding officer was escorted into the chamber wearing prisoner restraints. The man who had once been one of the most powerful figures in human space now looked diminished, aged by the weight of his crimes and the knowledge that his life's work had been exposed as a monstrous betrayal of everything the military was supposed to protect. General Harrison, the prosecutor began, please tell the tribunal about Project Quantum Echo and your role in its development. What followed was 3 hours of testimony that laid bare the scope and horror of the conspiracy. The weapons program had indeed been designed to pacify populations that posed a threat to what the conspirators called galactic stability. Refugee colonies, independent colonies, research stations that asked too many questions, even entire species that showed too much technological advancement too quickly. The plan was elegant in its simplicity, Harrison testified with the flat effect of someone whose world had collapsed around him. Create weapons capable of precise planetary sterilization, then, use the threat of those weapons to enforce compliance with galactic law. Any population that refused to comply would be eliminated as a threat to overall stability. And, how many populations were targeted for elimination, the prosecutor asked. Initial estimates suggested approximately 37 colonies and research stations, with a total population of roughly 50 million beings. Phase 2 would have expanded to include entire planets that showed signs of political instability. The number hung in the air like a toxic cloud. 50 million beings marked for death by a small group of officials who had decided that their vision of order was worth any price. General, the defense attorney said when his turn came, did you truly believe that the systematic extermination of civilian populations was necessary for galactic peace? Harrison was quiet for a long moment, and, when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a man who had seen the depths of his own moral failure. I believed that preventing another war like the Andromedae conflict justified extreme measures. I was wrong. But, at the time, looking at the casualty figures from that war, the idea of preventing future conflicts through the threat of overwhelming force seemed logical. Even if it meant committing genocide? We told ourselves it wouldn't be genocide, Harrison said quietly. We told ourselves we were preventing larger conflicts that would claim even more lives. We told ourselves that the threat alone would be enough, that we would never actually have to use the weapons. But, you were prepared to use them. Yes. God help me, we were prepared to use them. The trial continued for 2 more days, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The evidence was overwhelming, the testimony was clear, and the moral implications were inescapable. The conspiracy was real, its goals were genocidal, and the only reason it had been stopped was the actions of 3 individuals who had chosen to break the law in service of a higher justice. When the final verdict was announced, ZYX felt a strange sense of peace. Guilty on all charges, but with a sentence that reflected the tribunal's recognition that sometimes criminals could also be heroes. Commander ZYX, the Chief Justice announced, this tribunal finds you guilty of the charges against you. However, in recognition of your service to galactic peace and the lives you saved through your actions, this court sentences you to time served plus 1 year of community service working with refugee resettlement programs. It was more lenient than she'd dared hope, but she noticed that it also effectively ended her military career. She would never again serve as a diplomatic officer or hold a position of trust within the Valdorian government. The price of doing the right thing was the loss of the life she'd built and the identity she'd carried for 20 years. Marcus received a similar sentence, though his included restrictions on travel and regular check-ins with parole officers. Kefvar, as a foreign national, was simply deported back to Andromedan space with a notation in his file that would prevent him from ever again working in intelligence. As they left the tribunal chamber together, Marcus looked at her with an expression she'd learned to read during their various imprisonments together. Any regrets? He asked. ZYX thought about the question seriously. She'd lost her career, her reputation, and her place in the society she'd served faithfully for 2 decades. She would spend the rest of her life being remembered as either a hero who'd prevented genocide or a traitor who'd betrayed her own government, depending on who was telling the story. "None," she said finally. 2 million people are alive because of what we did. That's worth any price. Even if it means spending the rest of our lives as outcasts?" She looked at him, this human who had saved her life twice now, and realized that she'd found something more valuable than career or reputation or social standing. She'd found people worth fighting for and a cause worth serving that transcended the narrow interests of any single government or species. "Marcus," she said, "did you know that most refugee resettlement programs are desperately understaffed and underfunded?" "I did notice that," he replied with a smile that reminded her of the young engineer she'd first met in the collapsed tunnels of Proxima Station. "And did you know that they're always looking for people with technical expertise and diplomatic experience?" "I may have heard something along those lines." "Well then," ZYX said, looking out at a galaxy that was safer today than it had been a month ago, "I guess we'd better get to work." 6 months later, the Rigel Refugee Resettlement Center received its largest donation in history from an anonymous benefactor who had liquidated several black budget accounts and redirected the funds to humanitarian purposes. The center used the money to expand its operations and hire additional staff, including a former Valdorian diplomat, a former human engineer, and a former Andromedan intelligence analyst who had decided that saving lives was more rewarding than gathering secrets. The weapons program was dismantled, its research destroyed, and its personnel scattered to assignments where they could be closely monitored. The shadow organization that had orchestrated it was exposed and its members prosecuted, though some observers noted that remarkably few of them received sentences as harsh as the 3 people who had exposed them. But, in the end, the sentences mattered less than the lives saved and the precedent established. Throughout the galaxy, the message was clear: no conspiracy, no matter how powerful or far-reaching, was beyond the reach of individuals willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. And sometimes, just sometimes, doing the right thing was its own reward. In the years that followed, when young officers and diplomats studied the Kepler Station incident at their academies, they would learn about the importance of moral courage and the duty to disobey unlawful orders. They would learn about the price of truth and the value of conscience. Most importantly, they would learn that heroes weren't always the people who followed orders and served their governments faithfully. Sometimes heroes were the people who looked their commanders in the eye and said no, the people who chose principle over protocol and justice over law. Sometimes heroes were criminals. And sometimes that was exactly what the galaxy needed them to be. The stars continued their ancient dance, civilizations rose and fell, and, somewhere in space, former enemies worked together to build a better future for refugees who had lost everything except hope. It wasn't the ending any of them had planned, but it was the ending the galaxy deserved. And, in the quiet moments between crises, when ZYX looked up at the stars and remembered the human mechanic who had saved her life and become something more than a friend, she knew that some prices were worth paying. Even if it meant confronting the alien pilot only to see the human mechanic who had saved her, and choosing to save him in return, no matter what the consequences might be. The universe had a twisted sense of humor, but sometimes it also had perfect timing.